Got a sunburn to peel the daggers off your tongue. Young and dumb, I'm rotting like a bed sore in a cold case that's never gonna be more than scratching at the walls while you're waiting for a bullet to come. All along I've been treading in the deep end, throw my mirror in the cupboard for the weekend. Try and put together pieces while I'm dreaming, but nothing's adding up to a thing but a hole in the head.
Have an opportunity here to provide leadership, support, and a voice to the voiceless. The sacrifices that we made during our service do not end here. We carry on. We push forward, and we give hope and inspiration through love, community, and support. Stay free.
Rights and freedoms in this country are absolutely everything to me because I personally know the sacrifice required in order to get them back once they're gone. So, when my brothers and sisters call stand 2, be sure I'll be there.
Legacy media will play their games, right? Like, this isn't about this or that. This is about freedom, period.
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Brothers and sisters in uniform, whether you're a police officer, military, check your hearts. Look where we're going. Man, wake up. I beg you.
If the veterans can't stand up and get a message across to the government, I don't know who can. I don't know. But we're going to give it our best shot. And I think we have a chance to win this and do it. But we need your help. And we need you to come, and we need you to stand too. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
bullets, yes, they robbed, sold out to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took out from the bottomless pit, my head was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs.
Hey, what's up, troops? Jeff Evely, the Magnanimous GenX'er Male, back with you now on this 19th day of April 2024, and I practice radical candor. All right, we got the gang on board with us here this evening. Summer44 over on Rumble was the first one on the board saying, good day all, and giving us the triple slashy right back at you. Dwayne says, hey, gang. Hey, Jeff and gang. Thanks, Dwayne, for always being with us. Terry is in the house, ladies and gentlemen. Says, good evening, all. Bad Grandpa is giving us the triple slashy. Right back at you, brother. Muriel says, good afternoon. Rob is here saying, good afternoon, evening, afternoon, all. Happy Red Friday. Yes, it is Red Friday. Thanks for reminding me. That's why I'm wearing my red t-shirt, because that was the current thing while the Afghan war was on, but we're not letting it go away. Rob is saying, share. Thanks for the top cover, brother. I appreciate all the help I can get. And Christine says, evening, and giving us a wave. And Muriel shared that out, so thanks. And Cindy, our most faithful of all watchers, says, good evening, Jeff, and giving us the hearts. Happy Friday, everyone. Smiley face. Debbie is here from Tabor, Alberta. Andrew says, good evening, Jeff Evely. It's FUMM Friday. Good evening, and troops. Share. Right on. All right. And Anne is here saying hi, friends. Christine says good Friday and greetings, Jeff, and give it a triple slash. Okay, guys, I'm going to dive into this sucker. Good evening to everybody. Happy Friday. And it is Red Friday. Support our troops. Yellow ribbon, red t-shirt. Oh, hey, Colleen. Hi. Let's okay, I'm done. Let's go and dive into this thing. Here is our philosophy quote for the day. And it's Marcus Aurelius, my boy, my man. He always, kind of keeps me going with the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, which everybody should read. And he says, if someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed. Harmed is the person who continues in the self-deception and ignorance. Very broadly applicable to our subject here tonight. And unfortunately, the people who are harmed most by what we're going to be discussing here tonight is, our young people, our youths, our children. And let's face it, I mean, they are self-deceiving and ignorant. That's just part of growing up. Those are the kinds of kind of ingrained qualities that we all have that take time to overcome. And, they need some time to learn some self-discipline and how to master their emotions, these kinds of things. So, it's through no fault of their own that they're being absolutely victimized in all of this. Sickest thing that's ever happened in Canada, like I'm always saying here. Okay, and here is our meme for the day, and we have a McPuffin, and he's marching around on the grass here, and the caption at the top says, "Drag Queen Story Hour should be renamed to Grooming Story Hour." Yep, that's what it is. I mean, nobody had a problem with drag queens before they started dragging the kids along. So nowadays, if you express any concern over that, then Marcy Ian will just call you a bigot. And here is one that's not a meme, but these things basically write themselves. This is Cosmin Duriez, and he is tweeting this out. This is a screen cap of that. From TNC News, and he says the Canadian Armed Forces tried to cover the scandal up, but I'm blowing the lid. A RMC Canada chaplain who was hailed by the Canadian military as an LGBT champion on Transgender Day of Visibility has been suspended following an alleged groping request. So shocker, right, guys? But we reported on this at the time. There was the first ever transgender chaplain that was being heralded by the Canadian Armed Forces as some great hero of the day. And now apparently this person has been stripped of their chaplaincy, and Cosmin is reporting on that because he's all over this stuff, which is great. And apparently it was a student, a young person that this groping request went out to. And now we have this individual in some hot water. But I can guarantee you, if that were a straight white cis hetero patriarch requesting some groping, then this would be all over the mainstream news. But that is a sign of the times, I guess. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to bring our guest in here. She's been waiting patiently backstage. Dr. Anne Gillies, how you doing, ma'am? It's good to have you aboard.
I'm good. It's good to be here with you. I'm looking forward to tonight.
As am I. I've been meaning to have this conversation with you for a while, actually. You've been on my Rolodex since the 1 Million March for Children, which was 20 September.
Yep.
So apologies for taking so long, but it seems like this is very prominent in the news cycle these days. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background before we get into it, just for anybody who doesn't know you, and how you ended up on your journey here.
All right. That's about a 45-year history, but we aren't going to go into all of that. So we've got a couple hours. So I got involved in all of these kind of issues with, we'll set COVID aside, pre-COVID, but my issues and my research with LGBTQ and the trans phenomenon particularly comes out of education. I I did my PhD, right through my academic education. I studied both psychology and theology, but my research always seemed to end up around the issue of same-sex attraction, what that is, where it comes from, what happens, the area of trauma. In fact, clinically, that was where I put my hat on. I dealt with adult survivors of complex trauma, chronic sexual abuse survivors, as in a therapeutic clinical setting. And so that's my passion. And I see a lot of the same things that I studied and then practiced in the area of trauma and trauma care that needed to be utilized with the gender dysphoric child. And of course, none of that was happening as we steamrolled into this whole medicalization of children. And I mean, the way it had been treated in the past, and I did not specialize in gender dysphoric children, just to make sure you understand that. My area was trauma and families. I usually saw adults or families with children, but in Canada, we had some pretty fabulous doctors like Dr. Ken Zucker, Dr. Susan Bradley from Toronto, who had specialized in treating gender identity disorder as it was back then. Of course, then it was reconceptualized in the latest diagnostic and statistical manual, the Psychological Bible, as gender dysphoria, which is most of your listeners will recognize. So the language terminology got changed in my estimation. It's like calling STDs STIs. So STDs were sexually transmitted diseases. And then all of a sudden, the medical association decided, no, we need to just call it sexually transmitted infections, as though it's not as important. So the same thing with gender identity. So that's kind of where I came in. And then I started doing more research into it and speaking out very actively long before COVID. And then I was watching your clips at the beginning of the show, and I was 18 days in Ottawa in that minus 30 weather. I'm a bit too old for this, but I'm telling you, I was never proud to be Canadian. And so seeing those clips again made me feel real good.
I mean, I feel the same way. I was there as well. You know what? I'm not even really sure how many days I was there, but just about the whole time. I got there, I think, the Tuesday after the first weekend. And yeah, I never felt so proud of my service. I was wearing my medals and never felt so proud to be Canadian. It was really incredible to see. And you touched on a few things there that I want to dive into. But before we do, I just want to plug your latest book here. This is the ultimate dissection, the truth of gender affirming care. And this was just from last September. Right. You know, there are a few other books. Well, actually, you have quite the list here going on Amazon. This is all available on Amazon, guys. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about the book before we get into some of this stuff?
Exactly. Everything that's come out now with the cast review that we're going to talk about later today, and we'll update you on all of that. Really, the research that has been coming to light over the last several years is in ultimate deception, the most recent of it. I didn't want to include all of it, but there's a lot of good links there. And so the ultimate deception, the truth of gender affirming care, and that has been the misnomer. It is not really affirming in any way, shape, or form. It is medicalization. But right. The gender affirming care is what was implemented in 2017 right across the boards in psychological associations. So every mental health provider has to use that in Canada. So that means the minute a child comes and talks, just mentions that they think they might be in the wrong body, they must be affirmed in that ideology, their thoughts, I will call it delusion. because most children don't even really understand what they're talking about in that realm. This is not the gender identity disorder child of the past. This is a new phenomenon. So I wanted to bring something that was very readable for parents and for those who are interested in this subject, so they would understand truth and verifiable research, not the research that's been manipulated and having some methodological issues that we see being promoted by media and all over the place, but really good sound research and some good stuff in there. So it's not a very big book. It's fairly easy to read, but I want to help parents be able to talk to their children and give them something of substance that helps them understand that this is not healthy and it is not really advantageous for the child. And now the CAS report that's just come out validates all of that. So that's kind of what that whole book is about.
Yeah, and here is Dr. Hilary Cass. This was a pretty good quote. She says, "The reality is we have no good evidence on the long-term outcomes of interventions to manage gender-related distress." And I think what she's referring to when she says the long-term outcomes of interventions is what you're describing here. It's the affirmative care model. And here is the Canadian Pediatric Society, and the title on this page is "An Affirming Approach to Caring for Transgender and Gender Diverse Youth." And I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. This is something that I might have shown a few times here, but you can see right here in their table 1 of terminology, gender affirming care. Now, again, this is the Pediatric Society. So this is children and youth. Yes. And they say gender affirming care is care provided to an individual to support their gender identity. This care may be medical, surgical, social, and or psychological. And you can see also they have gender affirming hormone therapy, gender affirming surgeries. I'll read this one. It says, also called transition related surgeries or gender confirming surgeries. This term refers to a range of surgical options that individuals may pursue as a component of transitioning. So again, this is the Pediatric Society, the children and youth. And if you don't think that it's happening in Canada, here is BC Children's Hospital. The gender clinic supports the needs of transgender and gender questioning youth up until their 17th birthday with puberty blockers and or gender affirming hormones. Here is Health Sciences North, and this is their gender diversity clinic. And as you can see, it's all kids in the picture here. And here is the Canadian Mental Health Association, mental health services for gender diverse and sexual minority youth. And they have, I think down here somewhere, they have more of the same, basically, with their services. So there's that. Here's the gender map, models of care, blah, blah, blah. So models for children and adolescents, affirmative models. In this model, young people who identify or express their gender differently than expected are allowed to be themselves. Adults allow them to explore their gender identity and expression. In some cases, the children are allowed to make social transition. Study shows that this helps young people do better. I'm not so sure about that. Whether or not they make another social transition later, or go to take medical or legal steps. And they have this section here that I thought was pretty telling, because they have a section on non-affirmative models and says some people believe that being transgender is bad. They try to stop young children from being themselves. These experts believe that if they discourage young children from being themselves, the children will not make a gender transition. And they have gender identity change efforts, reparative therapy, conversion therapy. And conversion therapy is the language that was adopted by 338 parliamentarians when they all voted unanimously for Bill C-4. You want
Which
to say
I
something
worked
about
on
that?
for about 3 years before it was finally passed, because that's another misnomer. Anyways, I can't even get into all of that right now. I was just thinking something we should clarify, Jeff. And I think I'm going to read this from my book. So this is just page 11. The BC Canada, of course, Teachers Federation Handbook on Gender Education states that gender is a product of the mind. And I would definitely agree. One thing we need to understand is that gender has replaced the word sex in our vocabulary worldwide almost. I hear people all the time replacing it as though one is the same as the other. But we are biologically one sex or another. I believe in binary sex. I'm not into all of the diverse stuff. But what I will say is that we have different, we are all different in our makeup. And some of us express our sexuality more in a feminine or masculine way. But that doesn't mean that it's, static. We have to understand that gender distress comes because it's mental. There's a mental distress that's happening, first of all. And really, gender identity isn't an issue of the body. It is a disorder of the mind. And we used to treat children, young children, who had thought they were, a boy or a girl. This is prior to 2010. With behavioral therapy and helping them to rectify their dysphoria so that they could actually re-identify with their own body. So, and they weren't being put on puberty blockers. Oh yes, this is excellent. So this is just recently, Dr. Miriam Grossman, who, if you follow her, she's an amazing woman. I remember hearing her in Toronto many years ago, but she recently said this, and I have said parts of this over and over and over again, but she put it all together. My profession captured, my colleagues spineless. And it's so true. They're terrified to lose their jobs, right? Educators are corrupted. Children, this is what really hurts my heart, is that there's no dollar value on our children, and they're being sacrificed on this literal steamroller, well, even a conveyor belt, right? They really are being sacrificed, and their bodies and their minds and their souls are being changed for some kind of silliness that leaves them in a far worse place than they were before when they were just children, Anyways, families have been destroyed. This whole transgender phenomena is destroying families. It's pitting children against their parents. And civilization dismantled. She just put it all together, and she just nailed it. And I've said this for a while. Where are the professionals? Where are the Canadian professionals that are speaking out? Jordan Peterson, he's been speaking out. Thank God he came, on the forefront with pronouns in 2016, just about the time I was publishing Closing the Floodgates. So, it was just like hearing him. I was like, yes, this is what I'm writing. This is what I'm talking about. Here you are saying it. And I keep going. Every time I hear him, I just think, thank God for Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. And the language, like the co-opting of the language you touched on a little bit there, that, and that is a phenomenon that is described in 1984, the use of language as a means of mind control. The language has been co-opted, and like you said, they're conflating gender and sex now. As far as I am able to tell, and I'm a layperson, but gender is more of a broad term that could apply to, say, components of plumbing and electrical, because there are male and female parts. Exactly. And you need to know which ones fit together. It's a coupling relationship wherein the male is partially inserted into the female, and sex is the biological manifestation of gender for the purpose of reproduction. It seems to me to be kind of straightforward, but then there's people's perception of their bodies, and dysmorphia is a thing, and we don't give anorexics liposuction. We don't just indulge their their delusions, as you put it, and I would agree. But in this case, this seems to be the only one, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you were kind of saying there was that in all other cases, when somebody's perception of themselves or reality discords with themselves or the reality, then what we do is we provide counseling to help train their perceptions to better accord with the reality. And this is the only case in which we actually alter the reality in order to accord with our perceptions. Am I getting that about right?
I think you're doing pretty good. Now, I think we're going to find more and more, we're going to see more distorted realities, distorting realities to fit perceptions. I think that's how you worded it. And I think that's exactly, because that's what's coming down the pipe with pedophilia and the whole MAPS thing and language again. We have to be so aware, so on guard for our children, because everything that's been going on in the last 70 years, the trajectory of the sexual revolution, the whole place to where we are right now that I talk about in Closing the Floodgates, that's brought us to this place where at some point in the very near future, pedophilia will become an orientation. It was pushed in 2014 with the American Psychological Association, and at that point there were enough pretty staunch psychologists and psychiatrists that were saying no, we're not going to class this as an orientation, but it's in the wording pretty close there, and it will come. And that means once it becomes an orientation, then it is no longer illegal, right? That's what happened before. And so with the same-sex homosexuality in 1988, and I'm not against people. You can choose what kind of sexual experience you want. You're an adult. But let's leave our kids alone. Let's leave our kids out of this discussion, because it's not for children. It's not for minors. And we need to be able to protect them. And we need those guardrails, if you like, or barriers around our children. And we're quickly losing those in society.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're pointing to the normalization of pedophilia, because I think we are seeing that real time. Like, we're witnessing it real time, especially with the drag queen story hours. And we have known, as long as civilization has existed or somewhere thereabouts, that early sexualization of children is not good for them. It's quite unhealthy and traumatizing. So right now we see and just way too many kids being drug along to some of these drag queen story hours that leads to all this confusion and indoctrination into this gender ideology that leads them down the path to becoming a permanent medical patient. From the trauma perspective, like what do we what kind of impacts can we expect to see for children who are subjected to this kind of treatment?
With no, you're talking about affirmation care, right?
More like the what I referred to in the opening here as more like grooming hour with the
oh my goodness.
And
well, so you're opening a whole kettle of fish, because we're experiencing some new things within our education. Well, nothing new under the sun, but our education and curriculum is also all tied up in grooming. I will say grooming children. And it's pretty scary, because we used to be, as therapists, able to identify children pretty readily who had been abused in the home, particularly. But if they had had sexual experience, early sexual experience, it was pretty evident by some of their behavior, some of their language, some of the things they did, and you could get to the bottom of it a whole lot quicker. Now, the grooming is happening, even, I believe, in our classrooms, and with some of the actual, I will call it pornographic material. The library books that we've seen, I had purchased one, I wanted to read it, and I took it downstairs just to check in with my 31-year-old son. This was a little while ago. And I said, just open up this children's book and tell me what you think of it. And he just randomly opened it about halfway. And he said, Mom, this is porn. And I went, hey, there you go. And it's drawings, right? But listen, it's absolute porn. And here we are having young children able to retrieve these books. And there's some of them are even in the classroom. And if you have a pro LGBTQ teacher, you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to be promoting some of these things to your children. And is that what you really want? So grooming is happening so many different ways. I mean, the uncle next door, down the street, the neighbor, whatever, that used to be where, the grooming happened, or someone, got the child alone. Usually it was a relative of some kind, but there's always been those people that will take advantage of children and, entice them with different things and most often relationships and gifts and all those kind of things. Now we have them just being actually indoctrinated in the classroom into all kinds of sexual experiences that are just not healthy for them.
Yeah, and this is a statistic that I like to point to fairly often here. This is just Statista, which is an aggregator website, and these are U.S. statistics. But of course, we don't really have statistics in Canada, so we rely on the U.S. a lot. And so, and this, I'll just make this a little less busy for you guys. Let me take this stuff out. So the thing is, let's start with the oldest generation here. You can see this is the percentage. It says share of respondents who identified as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender in the United States from 2012 to 2023 by generation. Now, right off the bat, I think that's a little bit problematic to gather statistics in that way because transgender doesn't really fit in with these other categories. It's kind of a categorical error where everything else, lesbian, gay, bisexual, those are preferences, whereas transgender is basically a metaphysical claim. So they don't fall into the same category, especially a preference is, I'm not saying that's a choice either. Like I didn't choose to enjoy pizza more than I do Brussels sprouts, but I just happen to be hardwired that way. And in fact, I might be better off if I preferred Brussels sprouts, but I'm just wired to prefer pizza. And so that is what we're talking about. We're talking about lesbian, gay, or bisexual. We're talking about transgender. This isn't a claim that I prefer a certain thing. This is a claim that I am a certain thing. So I don't think those really go together, but I do think that the transgender component of it is making up an increasing percentage of these numbers. And you can see the silent generation here. This is the people born 1945 or earlier. It never cracks 2% for lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. But
That's
if we
right.
go to the baby boomers, it goes up to about 2.7%. That would be like the sexual revolution generation, I guess. And then there
just
is.
Let me share here for a second. Remember,
Sure.
This is for men and women that are under 2%. Like this is just the whole Kinsey thing that there's 10% of the population. So this is since 1948 have been homosexual or bisexual or lesbian. That was false information. It was erroneous research. It should have been nipped in the bud in 1949, and instead it was promoted. It's always been such a small percentage. And now, yes, go ahead with what we're seeing now happening in Gen Z. It's astronomical.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to get to that here in just a couple of seconds.
Sorry, I'm rushing ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Please, by all means, interject whenever you have something to say. But here we see Gen X. They get up to about 4.5% near the 2023 mark here. But before that, like 3.3, 3.8. So up a little bit. Millennials up again, gets all the way up to 11.2% in 2022. And then Gen Z just, I mean, you'd have to add all the rest together and you wouldn't get rates as high as we see with Gen Z. So Gen Z is up to, in 2023, we're looking at 22.3%. So more than a fifth of Gen Z is identifying as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. That is 10 times the numbers of the silent
Yep.
generation or the boomer generation. And so what I'm inferring from this is that we don't really have this natural phenomenon that it's being touted as, these people, this civil rights movement of where there are these people who have been in the closet for, you know, forever, and now they're just elated to be themselves and they get to come out of the closet. Because if that were the case, we would expect to see the numbers highest in the older generations, but that's not what we see. What we see is the inverse, where the numbers are astronomically higher in the youngest generation, indicating that this is more like a social contagion than a
Well,
genuine civil rights movement.
what I want to show you there too is look from 2013. 2013 was when the designation changed and the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So instead
Right.
of being transsexual, instead of being gender identity disordered, then it went from there to transgender. And so everything now transgender is really replaces transsexual, which it used to be called, right? But you
Right.
look at this and you can see from 2013 onward, there's a pretty steady climb. And um, since biological factors haven't changed, this is exactly a social phenomenon. And we have many kind of forces that are kind of coming together here. We have the big thing with education, but we also have social media and cell phone use. And look at, think of smartphones of 2020. Look at what's going on with our youngest generation now, who've been basically raised with cell phones and have all of the technological advancements at their fingertips. And one of the big problems, of course, there is that everyone's an expert. You check on TikTok, you'll find what you want to say. People who say what you want to hear, and there's all kinds of things that young people are watching, and certainly with the transgender ideology, that's just so promoted, and there's so many different educational pieces on Reddit and different platforms to help these children who are confused, because who wouldn't be confused in a social climate we have today? And so instead of really helping them get to the bottom of their confusion and talk to them about what's going on in their life and what makes you think or feel the way you do, where did this come from? Oh no, we just pat them on the back and say, I know what's happening with you. And everyone's a psychologist now, and the teachers have been labeling and prescribing, not prescribing medically, but diagnosing. I remember when I first heard that happening, I was just frustrated because, I was really downright angry. I'm thinking, you're educated to teach our children. You're not educated in psychological treatment or diagnosis, and yet here we are. And that's the culture we're living in. And children now, of course, in the last 5 years, they diagnose themselves, and everyone's supposed to go along with it. Like, this is ridiculous. Give our heads a shake.
Well, yeah, and it's not medicine, so
No,
perhaps diagnosis is too strong a word. Um, I think you're explaining it quite beautifully, but there's this other component to it, though. It's a dogma, and so this is a kind of thing that can neither be confirmed nor disproved. Like it's a claim. Like I said, it's a metaphysical claim, but it can't be tested. There's nothing you
you're
can
right.
say to
And
disprove it. So yeah, it seems to me that there's this kind of cultist component of it as well, where the children are sort of the special and perfect little angels in the new woke theocracy.
mhm. Well, we've just in Canada been allowing children to direct what medical interventions are being used and utilized. Since
Yeah.
when could a child understand such things? And when could they, it's all based on their self-declared identity. It's not based on any kind of reality, because if you, here we have a physical body. What you're thinking, our thought processes can get distorted. That's just the reality for every single person. And if we don't, keep ourselves based in reality, distortions can come. And people can believe all kinds of things, but that's where we're coming at with these children. They are self-directing their own medical interventions, and that's been pretty scary. And so now we're coming out the other end of that, and we're seeing detransitioners and seeing the sad reality that these interventions do not have the support of long-term research. They don't have anything to back up the medical interventions that are being used. And in fact, long-term harm is probably what's happening to these children by and large. There may be the odd, adolescent or adult that is helped by such medical interventions because they're further along in their thinking, but to have children actually, directing their own health care is dangerous.
Yeah, and you touched on a couple of different things there. Number one was the detransitioners. That is a new phenomenon that we're seeing, and it's heartbreaking. I can't. I don't know how else to describe it. It's. I mean, I don't say that it's the sickest thing that ever happened in Canada for nothing. Here is just a quick montage that the Daily Caller put together here. Some transitioners from the United States, detransitioners. These are young people who transitioned, underwent the biomedical transition, and then later regretted it. And they're coming out in droves. Here we go.
I don't know what to do anymore. I am now 20 years old. I started medically transitioning at 16. I got a double mastectomy before I was on hormones. And then a few months later, I was put on testosterone. This isn't the solution. Destroying my body, my life. I was a teenager.
Yes.
I didn't know better. I'm sad for myself, of course, but I'm sad for humanity and the children. I'm angry. What's going to happen to the kids and the youth? And there's so many, there's so many. When we get 30, 40-year-olds that are going to be like, what the did I do when I was 16 or whatever, and you can't go back. I really, really hope that all these professionals get their friggin' karma, because I know that some of them don't realize and some of them might be brainwashed and whatever, but some of them know exactly what they're doing. I really feel.
So that's quite the clip. It's about 4.5 minutes long, but I wanted to jump to a Canadian example here. This is Lois Cardinal on Twitter, and she, I think, is a transsexual female, so natal male, born male, transitioned to female, I think at 18, and is currently seeking MAID in order to be released from the suffering that's been inflicted on them. And they're Indigenous, and so this is a quick clip and they're quite good on Twitter. You should give them a follow. They're excellent. So, and this person also had a very significant impact on Danielle Smith's awakening, I guess. So let's hear it from Lois.
What a frustrating day. I'm not crying about it. I don't have time to cry. But to have to settle for numbing cream that doesn't work, and more or less I have to wait until I experience another episode of depth loss or an infection to consider reapplying. I'm like, what? No. I'm gonna make a doctor's appointment with my GP.
So what they are saying here is depth loss. They're talking about the vaginoplasty. So that is the wound that is inflicted
Yes.
on males after they've been castrated in order to simulate a vagina. And of course, it's always going to try to heal itself. So it requires dilation and a lot of care in order to prevent that. And so he's talking about the healing process, which is quite painful if there's any kind of complication, and there almost always is. And
There always, yeah.
yeah,
And that dilation has to continue. I mean, as far as I know, anyways, this is not just a short-term thing. They have to continue to do that. The medical treatment is horrendous. No one should be allowed to even do this. I mean, without full awareness of the consequences. And what child of 10 years old that starts on puberty blockers has any idea of the long-term consequences that's going to happen down the road? I really appreciated what that second video, what he was saying. And I think this is what has troubled me so much is that, and as Dr. Grossman said, you know, the professionals have failed. And it's not only the psychologists and the psychiatrists and the family counselors, it's the doctors, like the MDs. And, you know, it burns me because there's no way that they cannot know what is going to happen down the road, especially the medical doctors. You know, what's going to happen down the road with these surgeries, with these children, if they have surgeries. And, you know, most of the comments I've heard and what I've you know, seen and read is that there is no disclosure. The parents aren't really told what's going to happen. It's kind of like just this blanket thing. Oh, this is a good thing, and you know, this is fine. We'll just put them on puberty blockers, and when they're on puberty blockers, it kind of just suspends puberty for a while. But if they decide that they want to go back to being the sex that they were born with, then they can. Well, let me tell you, 4 years on puberty blockers, guess what happens? You know, all of the effects of puberty have stopped, and most of these are young women now, like about 85%, not what it used to be. Oh, I wanted to see something else. Just popped in my mind, and my mind is like this now that I forget things. You said something about the detransitioners are a new thing. And I want to say, yes, they are, but no, they aren't. Because when therapists were allowed to treat children, as Dr. Ken Zucker did, Susan Bradley did in Toronto at the Gender Clinic for like 30 years. He's written tons of papers. When they could treat the very few children that came to the clinic every year, not hundreds and hundreds, those children, between 88 and about 97% of those children, and most of them were male, not female back then, they desisted. That means that they did not carry through with any kind of transitioning, social or otherwise. It's only since we started pushing gender affirmation that we have this influx now of children and adolescents who are now transgender, not gender identity disordered or gender dysphoric. We hardly even talk about that. It's all transgender. So, I mean, the fact that they reverted was the normal. That was the normal trajectory with help. Now, after we put them on all of these medications, now we're seeing the detransitioners because they've had to go through the whole process with medication and surgery. And my heart breaks for them.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't anything that we haven't known from the get-go, essentially. Here is just one example of multiple studies that I have saved in my bookmarks here. And this is a follow-up study of 10 feminine boys. And this is from 1986. Here's the abstract. It says, 10 subjects who exhibited feminine behavior and cross-dressing as young boys are described. At follow-up, 8 to 10 years later, 4 are heterosexual, 2 are homosexual, 1 is transsexual, and the outcome is uncertain in 3. Of the 8 who met the DSM-3 criteria when evaluated, 3 are heterosexual, 2 are homosexual, 1 is transsexual, and the outcome is uncertain for 2. Gender dysphoria appears to be a necessary but not sufficient factor in transsexual outcome. The strength, rigidity, and persistence of cross-gender behavior through latency may be a good predictor of transsexual outcome. So they're saying translation is gender dysphoria, just feeling uncomfortable with your body on account of your gender, is not sufficient to support a biomedical transition involving surgery, or any transition for that matter.
Exactly. That's a good report. And see how few, part of the problem with the research with these young children is there were so very few of them. I think in the 2013 DSM, there was only 0.014% of the population who went on to become transsexual. Like, it's just such a small proportion. And now we're seeing this huge trajectory. Like 5,000 children in 2021. No, better get that right. Yeah, I think 2021, 2022 were diagnosed gender dysphoric and went on treatment of some kind, medical treatment of some kind, at Tavistock in the UK. And so we have this explosion, and these children, they have complicating factors in their life because biology, as I said, hasn't changed. So what's going on here? Well, you were talking, that was a 1998 or 1986 report or study. There was a study in the early 1990s of gender identity diagnosed children, boys. And of those that have been diagnosed, this is a US study, I think it was 52% of them had mothers who were borderline personality disorder. We have to understand that this population has a lot of extenuating circumstances. There's a lot of mental illness in the home. And this isn't trying to blame parents, but we have to recognize that, and that's what Dr. GenX'er, he would treat the whole family. He didn't just treat the child, he treated the family. And they began to respond. And you see, this is the whole issue. You can't separate the child from their environment. You have to include family members. You have to look at pre-existing traumas, life experiences, sexual abuse. I mean, that's a huge thing within the LGBTQ community. That's what really got me started to understand that and wondering, okay, what's going on here? What kind of things? And you treated the whole family dynamic, and then you had success. And you didn't treat it with drugs and medication to change the child's, or attempt to change the child's sex, because you can never do that. Logistically, they're biologically, you're always going to be male or female. That's it. But they can change what they see and how they feel about themselves somewhat. And yet the gender dysphoria it's not alleviated by the medication. And that's what came through in the CAS report. So I think we have, we're in a new place historically because of what's happening in Great Britain and the UK. And it really is going to shape the future of healthcare for minors, because although Canada is like, we're on steroids for doing all this gender transitioning and gender affirming care, and it's going to come back and bite everyone. And it's not just the doctors, not just the psychologists, not just the therapist, but look at the educators. And I'm sorry to say this, I mean, I've been trying to present to our school board. I've ended up going to court with our school board. So I started in 2018 trying to educate the school board on how nefarious all this stuff was and bringing research, and they don't like me. Anyways, what can I say? But I won't stop. Like, come on, this is creating the greatest mental health crisis we've ever seen with children. And we're doing it. Our education system is part and parcel of it. So unless we can change things from the grassroots up, which I'm hoping, and I think parents are really starting to get this picture that the education system is pretty bad and we need to do something and get your kids out, for one thing, anything you can do to get them out of there, because it's not just the education now, it's peers and children to children teaching children, things they've learned, and it's just like, it's insidious. And I'm off on a tirade here, so I better let you ask questions.
No, that's good. You're giving me lots to work with there. And you mentioned that the peer group is also a factor, and I think it's probably one of the most significant factors, not as important as perhaps the education, because we have indoctrination where education should be. But what can you tell us about clustering?
Well, let me tell you this. I just did I'm finishing up a paper, kind of a research paper on peer identified peer attached children, peer attachment basically, and the effect on children. And I did a presentation in Alberta last weekend, the first time I've ever actually taught on this. And, sadly, we've been duped since the Second World War and into thinking that peer attachment is a good thing for our children. And it's okay so not everyone's going to love what I say here. And certainly I made lots of mistakes with my own children. I put them in daycare. Yeah, I put them in daycare early because I thought it was important for me to go to work. And believe me, in those years, I was just working for minimum wage. I didn't have a PhD. I didn't have a clue about things. I was just trying to keep our family afloat, unfortunately. And many parents are today, so I understand that. But letting someone else raise your children, and then those children affecting your children. So all kinds of behavioral problems have been happening. Then there's lots of reasons for that, but when we put our children with children their own age, and some of it's good for a little while, but 6 to 8 hours a day, and then they end up in preschool and then in our education system, what's happening is it's like the blind leading the blind. And so children are coming from all sorts of home environments. They see all kinds of things. They bring it to the other children. And so your kids are getting indoctrinated in so many different ways. And of course, now with porn and cell phones and children sharing all kinds of things is so insidious. So this whole area of peer attachment is pretty close to my heart. And what it has done, it has robbed children of the secure parental attachment they were meant to have, and which was pretty much across the board prior to the Second World War, and where women had to, part of the war effort, went out and worked. And that's not a critique. I'm not trying to criticize that issue, but it's that we kind of developed a mindset, and the whole feminist movement. I'm not against some of the issues of feminism, but I am against the movement itself, because it put women in a place where motherhood and parenting and family became secondary to the actual needs of the children. And that's where we have a mess on our hands. And so there's a lot of things that'll take a few generations to actually change. But you know what? I'm seeing a lot of young moms and dads making sacrifices these days to be with their kids, and especially those first 5 or 6 years. And I would suggest, I don't even think the children need to be in public education, and I wouldn't put them in it anyways, but formal education, let me put that, until they're about 7 years old, 6 or 7. Why do they need to be away from their parents? Those early years are the times when the children just need to be kids and just need to be loved on, and they have that secure relationship with mom and dad. I mean, there are a few abusive situations. I know that. I get that. But the majority of parents, they know the best for their children. They are the ones who love their children, not the daycare workers, not the, and there's good daycare workers. Hear what I'm saying here, not the teachers. The teachers are not going to be serving your kids 3 meals a day. They're not going to be putting them to bed at night. They're not the ones that you want your kids attaching to. It's the secure attachment of parents. And you've got me on another tirade. There we go, Jeff. Thank you very much.
No, I mean, I rant. That's basically what I do on this show. So there's a lot to rant about these days.
Well, I can rant too. Yeah.
That's quite all right. I mean, that's what we came here to do, is just kind of get it all out. Yeah, and you touched on quite a bit there too. And you know, I think the feminist movement, like, you know, you mentioned the GI generation, you know, they went to World War II and the men went off to war. The women went into the factories to kind of cover them off. But
Right.
those women, like, they didn't stay in the factories. When the men came back from the war, they went
No.
back into the home, and we had the breadwinner housewife, white picket fence with a single car, and
Yep.
you know, ticky-tack houses. So
And the
so
boomer generation.
and then what?
The boomer generation.
Yeah, they ruined it.
Yeah, and we did. But then along with that, after that, there was this whole push into women into the workforce. And
Yes.
and you know, I didn't, yeah. I mean, we could be of two minds. I have a profession, I have a career, but I never started any of that until after my youngest child was, you know, well on in his almost early teens. So, but there's so much to be said about moms, particularly staying home with their children just as long as they can, and in our very difficult financially and you know, economic collapse in our country, you know, that we just have some problems with all of that. So sometimes it means really going back to basics and really looking at what do we need? What do we really need to survive? And is it possible to do so with less? We're all finding that we have to do that. And then how do we protect our children? And it's moms and dads that we need to step up and protect your children at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, protect them from the schools and the medical system, it seems. And there is a lot to be said for stay-home moms. And I guess that's where I think it really sort of shifted and went completely in the other direction, where it's like these housewives or stay-home moms. Like, housewife is a dirty word. You're not even allowed to
Well,
say
it
that
almost
anymore.
is, you know.
Yeah.
But
And so there, you know, we should be venerating housewives and stay-home moms for putting their children first, but it seems that nowadays, you know, well, perhaps not so much as it once was, but in recent decades, if a woman were to stay home with her children, like, other women would kind of look at him like, oh, that's nice that you can do that, and they're out pursuing a career. And it seemed to be that you know, there was this cultural push to you know, kind of denigrate motherhood and make that, like you say, secondary. But it went even further, where it's like, you know, having kids is gross, and you know, it's kind of a waste of time, and women should be out there chasing after those the corporate ladder, climbing that corporate ladder and stuff like that. So it seemed like all of the incentives, like, just flipped, and now we're like the cultural incentives, and now we're living with the fallout of that, it seems.
we are. And, you know, Jeff, I think women have felt less than if they didn't have a career, if they didn't, you know, somehow, you know, and it was because they were really looked down on by other women and by men, but other women particularly, and career women who often did not have children until they maybe much later in life. And so
Yeah.
I have a prescription for young women. Here it is. Get married, find a good man. This is for men and women. Marry young. you know what? Be committed. Marriage is not just an institution, it's a covenant. And you know, marriage and family will change. That commitment to the whole of marriage and family will change the dynamic of the culture, but it'll change the children, the outcome for children tremendously. And you know what? There's so much satisfaction in raising children. There's a lot of headache. I'm not suggesting.
Yeah.
um,
It's
there's a lot.
responsibility, but that's good for you. Taking responsibility is good for
You know
you.
what? It makes you grow up, and it makes
Yes.
men grow up early. Getting
Yes.
married, you know. Unfortunately, my first marriage was not successful. I was married, and so this is in my book, Damaged by the Predators Among Us. It's why I do what I do, because my first husband sexually abused my children, him and his boyfriends. And so
Sorry to hear that.
there's not every marriage is good, but you know what? If he had not have been off in his wonderful wherever he was, you know, in his ideology and thinking that this was okay to do to children, you know what? I was a committed wife, and I loved him. I thought he was committed. I was wrong. But anyways, that's another digression, and not many people have to deal with that, thank God. But yeah, so that's our story. Two of my boys share their experience at the hand of their fathers, at the hand of their father. And yeah, it's not an easy read, but it is the reality of pedophilia. And I would say, now this will really get me in trouble, the reality of pedophilia among some homosexual males. And, you know, you could say, well, he was bisexual, he was married to you. Well, as soon as I divorced him, believe me, he was in the gay lifestyle 100%. He was using our marriage as a front to do what he wanted to do. And there are predators among us, so we have to be aware of that. So saying all I've said about marrying early, I was naive, what can I say? But, you know, if you come from a good home and you have some things in place, just hang in there and work on your marriage and enjoy those children when you're young. And that really is the prescription for change in our culture.
Yeah, and Anne is here saying, I married at 19. I'm 45 now. Well, good for you, Anne. That
Amen.
is fantastic. And, you know, people, I think, are very preoccupied with marrying too young and being too naive.
Well,
and somebody else, one of the other ladies was just in here saying, Patricia was saying, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince, is the old saying.
Maybe I should say this here too, Jeff. I'm interrupting you. But you
Yeah,
know
no
what? There's a difference between a 19-year-old in this day and age than there was 40 years ago. And I would say
Yes.
that the average 19-year-old is it's not just naive. They maybe have a whole lot of extra experience. They aren't so naive, but they're very immature overall. And so, yeah,
This is
that's what I'm saying in a sense. But, you know, if we could turn back the clock, those were the nuclear family was what was making Canada and Canadians successful in, you know, after the war. And it's just gone downhill since there. And so anyways, that goes along with my pure attachment speech. So
Oh, not at all. And you touched on something that I think is important to highlight in this discussion as well. And this is something that Brett and Heather Weinstein talk about too. It's that people take longer to grow up in more complex societies. And we live in what is like the most complex society that has ever existed. And so it just takes kids longer to mature under those circumstances. It takes them longer to master that society to the point that they're actually functional in it, i.e. it takes them longer to mature. And, you know, I mean, like, you remember the movie Interview with the Vampire, you know, Brad Pitt's character is telling his backstory, and he starts out saying that he was 20 years old, but he owned a plantation. I remember he might've been 18, actually. He owned a plantation. He says, times were different then, and I was already a man. Yeah, times were much different then. Like, they didn't have as much to contend with in terms of, you know, developing that maturity, that mastery of their society. And so I don't hammer on Gen Z and the millennials like at all. I'm like, I understand that you guys are dealing with a hell of a lot more than previous generations had to when they were coming up. So maybe 19 is not the age for Gen
No,
Z to be getting married,
that's
but probably not long after that, a few years later.
if it will keep you from so many things. As far as, here's my prescription. If the child is raised with a secure attachment base with mom and dad and very little external interference in those very early formative years, then they are going to mature. And the more mom and dad can keep them out of the school system and out of all of those other diabolical things and hesitate giving them cell phones, that they have access to everything. Now, people will say, well, you're just sheltering them so much. Well, we need to shelter our children from some of the stuff out there. And actually, I've seen some wonderful families where, there's maturity, great maturity in the 18-year-olds, because they haven't had to deal with all those extraneous things that are really complicating children's lives, that have absolutely no meaning and no long-term benefit. So if we can protect children as long as we can from some of those things, and then we go into the whole thing, and don't let them go to the corrupt universities.
Yeah. Oh
we
my
get
God.
we get them through their teen years and homeschooling and those kind of things, and we send them to universities that are absolutely corrupted and will corrupt your children anyways. It's very difficult. So there's other things happening, though. There's some good things happening and good strategies happening out there educationally, even within external university concepts. So I think parents in the future will have more access to those kind of things, and the ones who are really awake and really seeing what's happening to the kids universally.
Right. Yeah, and it is universal. And the other thing that's universal is the public education. Aldous Huxley in Brave New World, that was one of the features of it. He sort of highlighted the sexualization of children as a kind of feature of tyranny, because the children in Brave New World, they had to engage in erotic play. That's what they did while they were on recess, is they were forced to engage in erotic play. And here we have drag queen story hour these days.
Listen, we have teachers telling and teaching children how to masturbate.
Oh my God, yeah.
And in BC, they're providing closets for children to go to. This is ridiculous. It's all Brave New World. It is so bad for our children.
And here's how bad it is, folks. This is an article from the National Post, just 29 September 2023. Title is Hundreds of Trans Teens Under 18 Have Had Breasts Removed in Canada, New Data Shows. Concerns have been raised about mastectomies in teens when uncertainties exist about long-term health effects and the possibility of regret. You think? And let me see. Here is the part that I'm looking for here.
Yeah.
It says of the 4,071 visits in total involving gender affirming mastectomies or breast reductions reported since 2018, 602 involved youth 18 and under. Of those, 303 involved teens 17 and younger. The youngest was 14. You imagine giving a double mastectomy to a 14-year-old?
This is where I hope the doctors get sued. I mean, this is just so horrible. This is child mutilation. I mean, I've been talking about this for a long time and done some, activism on this, but this is child mutilation. This is destroying the child, their biological ability to breastfeed and to be a mom. And talk about annihilation of women in totality. This is what is happening. Like, women have no safe places. Girls have no safe places in their schools. A child can't go to the washroom safely. I couldn't have imagined that as a child. I couldn't have imagined. And it's horrible. So here are children, trying to hold it all day long so they don't have to go to the washroom. This
Oh
is
my
child
God.
abuse. And anyways, yeah.
Yes.
And to see those numbers, and now for the CAS report to come out in the UK and say they didn't do surgeries in the UK, by the way, under 18, never did them. I mean, Canada, good old Canada, we
Oh
are
yeah.
just on the cutting edge of tyranny in all areas. But
Uh-huh.
to 14-year-olds, and they don't have the ability to consent because they can't understand the long-term complications. I actually read this a few years ago. There was a group of detransitioners,
Yes.
young detransitioning teens. So I think they were about 17 or 18, and there were about 4 of them. And they, there were more in the group, but there were 4 that were discussing and wondering when their breasts were going to grow back. Like, this is how ill-informed. This is ridiculous. This is how immature as well.
Yeah.
Biologically thinking, these children are very, very immature because they haven't been taught just normal physiology. This is ridiculous. And so here they have all this stuff happening. When are my breasts going to grow back? Well, nobody told them, I guess, that this once locked off. And what was the teats doctor in was that Florida? I mean, terrible. She advertised. I can't remember her name now. Advertised on her gender surgery site as eating the teats. I'm like, come on, isn't this sick?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, and that's another component of it too, is how they're marketing it for
Oh,
kids. When you
absolutely.
see yeeting, like that is something that the kids say online, just
Absolutely.
like they label it as top surgery and bottom surgery. Like
Oh,
they're using all these euphemisms and they're
back to the
marketing
language. Yeah.
terms.
Back to the language,
Yes.
minimizing what is actually happening. You can imagine. So there's not very many young women in those age ranges that have a mastectomy because of breast cancer. But the very few women, well, let's talk about the women who've had mastectomies because of breast cancer. They have residual emotional effects from that. Like, this is not just something you just kind of get over tomorrow.
No.
I mean, this is really difficult for people, and there's a lot of grief that comes just from having a mastectomy. It's a big decision, even when you have cancer. And here we are just lopping children's breasts off. It's just absolute abuse.
Yeah. Cindy's saying that's me. And I know Cindy, she had to have one breast removed because of breast cancer. And I think she's saying that's
So
me
sorry.
because there are these residual emotional effects. I am
Absolutely.
certain, as anybody, like even if I lost a finger or maybe even a hand, that would be still preferable to my junk. Like if I lost that, I think, that would be probably one of the most devastating things. So, I mean, the fact that this is going on at all is just incredible. It's like, I'll say it again, it's the sickest thing that's ever happened in Canada, and it's happening all over the place. And it starts with the schools and the grooming, and it moves into the medical system. And that was something that you touched on there a minute ago about, what's going on in the hospitals and what parents have shared with you in terms of their experience dealing with some of these so-called clinicians. So can you share a little bit about what that is like for them?
Well, the lack of actual health care for these children, and the parents being bullied into having their son or daughter, usually their daughter, transitioning. Parents have been told, and you've probably heard this on your show before, doctors have been telling parents, do you want a dead son or a live daughter, or dead son? That's right. Blackmail. It's blackmail. And not only that, so they're saying, what as a parent do you do with that? You're like, well, I don't want my child to die. So I guess if you're telling me this, even against their better judgment, they know, You know, most parents are aware that all is not right in this kingdom. But when they're blackmailed by their own physicians, by their own medical experts, in who suggest that the child is going to commit suicide. And you know, well, that's one thing the Cass report also talked about, the whole suicidal ideation and the studies that into the suicide. Like, I think out of Tavistock, there were 3. So Tavistock is the gender clinic in the UK that got shut down finally in 2024, or 2023. And then I think it just closed the last gender identity service in 2024. But they had 3 suicides out of their transitioning children, and any suicide is one too many. Don't get me wrong here. It's horrible. But the idea that these children are committing suicide because they are gender dysphoric needs to be pulled apart. And the stats of suicide with these children are far different than what doctors have told parents. And it is not number one, if your child is suicidal, first of all, you need to get them right to emerge. You know, if they're talking ways to commit suicide, you need to get medical intervention for the suicidal ideation, not gender dysphoria, because they're just going to put them on more pills that are going to make them actually worse. The puberty blockers exacerbate the dysphoria, which of course exacerbates the depression and anxiety that's already going on and creates more suicidal ideation. It's like cyclical. But you have to understand that so many of these children have been traumatized, go back to their family of origin dysfunction. They have all kinds of underlying issues, plus a huge majority, and I talk about this in Ultimate Deception, some new research come out suggesting that most of these children, most of them are on the autism spectrum. Now they may be. And I'd read up to 32% previously, and this one study said most of them are actually on the autism spectrum. So here you have very vulnerable children being indoctrinated with all kinds of suggestions, and their minds are like confused, and we're doing all this stuff and they're trying to figure it all out, and they're young kids that don't need this garbage in you know. And so no wonder we have some children that are struggling with suicidal ideation, but they've got all kinds of other underlying stuff apart from the gender dysphorics issue.
Was that something that was addressed in the Cass report, whether there was any difference in the rate of suicidality between pre-op and post-op?
Yeah, I'm just looking to see. I did put give me a second here. I wanted to I thought I did something, copied something down with about the suicidal stuff. Well, sure I did. Because they did touch on that.
I'll put something up on the screen here while you're looking.
What do you have there? Gosh,
another study here. It says this is one that I refer to quite often because it has sort of withstood the test of time. This is from 1973 to 2003 in Sweden, and it says long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sex reassignment surgery cohort study in Sweden. And I'll skip over kind of a lot of the results. It's here. I'll read the conclusion to you. Persons with transsexualism after sex reassignment have considerably higher risks for mortality, suicidal behavior, and psychiatric morbidity than the general population. Our findings suggest that the sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism and should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this patient group. I actually think that's a little bit of a cop-out. It says, it basically says that like once you butcher them, they're going to need a lot of counseling and therapy. But,
well, let me just explain that. Go back to that for a second, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem.
So what they're saying, their findings suggest, actually, if you can take that off, it's easier for me to read without the highlight. It's not very clear, and there you go. they're saying that sex reassignment and that it alleviates gender dysphoria. That is absolutely wrong. It does not. And the CAS report says it does not. That's part of this erroneous scientific study stuff that we've been following. That is not true. It's not taking into all the other considerations. And, but they are saying that the sex reassignment really doesn't suffice as treatment. So that's interesting. And, some of these things, the reality is that because of the poor studies, because there is nothing that suggests that these individuals actually, there's no long-term studies that actually suggest that any of the gender affirming care alleviates gender dysphoria. In fact, and that's what your videos were showing, your transgender individuals.
Right.
Now, there has been a few studies that show limited improvement for a short period of time. Because you know what happens, and it's like a placebo effect with children and adolescents. You put them on something, tell them they're going to be better, and guess what? They, oh, now I feel better. Well, then a year down the road, they're realizing, this dysphoria hasn't changed, and actually it doesn't change because there's all kinds of other complicating things. And so the longer they are in the process of transitioning, and certainly if they go through medical surgery, sex reassignment surgery, that they are more likely to suicide after the surgeries. And that's the saddest thing. And of course, nobody wants to talk about that. And that's where the reality is, and the rubber really hits the road. So we have to understand that non-evidence-based research is not good enough, and we have to do more.
And I'm just showing the graphic from this one too. I find it illustrates very well. They have the any cause of death matched on sex at birth, and gray is for female, black is for male. The solid lines are for people who did not transition. That's the general population. And the dashed lines are for the people who did. And as you can see, these dashed lines, they drop off precipitously right about the 12-year mark after the surgery. So all causes, so this would be anything. There's all kinds of complications and cancers and the like that can arise out of the over the long term on these things. But I think because the males, the natal males drop off the quickest, I think that's probably related to suicide. But we can see that all causes, like these people just start dropping off like flies about 12 years after the surgery compared to the general population. So it's not helpful. It's quite harmful.
Well, and you have this whole pathological issue that, you have children, gender dysphoric children, who have the same kind of trajectory as other psychiatric patients, as far as suicidal ideation. And we don't want to talk about that because we don't want to think that this is a mental illness or there's something, that is treatable with these children. But that's the reality, it's very treatable. And, if we went back to practicing, psychoanalytic treatment, behavioral therapy, as Ken Zucker did, then we would see the whole suicidal ideation alleviated in many of these children, if not most. And actually, that's what the CAS report is suggesting. This is really the most positive things. And the CAS report, there was an interim report that came out in 2020, which much of what's in the 2024 report, the one that was just released a couple of weeks ago, it has most of the same stuff from the interim report. And so they're calling for individualized case formation, which is something that psychologists and therapists always should do. I mean, we need to form a case around the individual child because every case is different. And then you follow that up with psychotherapy. I mean, this is a no-brainer. And yet here we have, and psychotherapists, of course, and psychologists have wanted to treat children, of course, gender dysphoric children. Well, that's conversion therapy. And don't get me going on that, because this is crazy. This is what our government has done. It has forced professionals to sit on their hands and let these children be subjected to incredible abuse.
Here is an excerpt from the CAS report here. It looks like one of the recommendations. It says, although some think the clinical approach should be based on a social justice model, the NHS works in an evidence-based way.
Yes.
And that I think is where that cultish component comes in, at least in my view anyway. It's the woke thing to do is to transition these children as quickly as possible, as opposed to relying on the evidence.
Well, and what the CAS report, one of the recommendations is screening for neurodevelopmental conditions, including autism and anything on the autism spectrum disorder and mental health assessments, which is it just is what any psychologist would normally do with any child, except for if they have to be affirmed in their gender ideology, their gender delusion. And so the CAS report is really bringing things back into the realm of psychotherapy, which is very healthy for children. And hopefully they don't talk about family therapy, but that would be the way to go. Because when you have children, and here's what happened. I mean, this is what makes it so confusing, because the gender dysphoric child from 2013 onward is not the same child of the gender identity disordered era, because those children desperately had very severe family dysfunction, or if not within the family, then sexual abuse and things going on. They were very, very young children. But see, now it's confusing because their learning behaviors in the education system, and like with sexual abuse, it's not clear-cut anymore. So it may be that the family itself has actually been a pretty solid family, but then the child's been indoctrinated through the education system, and that's where they're coming in to the gender affirmation stuff. And so it has to be still case formation, individual case formation, and psychotherapy, and including the parents, whether or not there's pre-existing mental health issues with the parents. It all needs to be assessed, because what parent doesn't want to help their child in the best way that they can? And so that's my hope and my prayer, that they will start acting professionally once again, and medical doctors would start going by their oath of do no harm, instead of radically jeopardizing children through such abusive techniques.
Yeah. And I wanted to share a bit of a video. This is up on Rumble. I'll show you guys. This is a Canadian video, transgender cult in Canadian children's hospitals. And this is apparently one parent's experience with some of these hospitals. So I'm just going to hit play on this, and I'm going to let my dog out here for 1 second. So bear with me, guys. I'll be right back.
Yep.
Oh, there's no sound, guys. Hang on. I have to mute Rumble a lot of the time when I'm doing these things, but let me just back this up just a touch. All right, that's good.
Here is the kind of formal people representing diversity. There were two different groups.
Okay.
Yeah. So next steps would essentially be Lupron. Lupron is a medication that essentially is like a medical menopause, really, is what we do. The nice thing about the medication is that it prevents any further growth of things like chest development that may be left to happen. It's also very reversible. So do you have any questions about that?
Well, I mean, it's just the usual kind of questions. Like I'm always asking how it is that we determine these things. So
it's not like there's a test that we can do to say, yes, you're transgender, and no, you're not. going by the research that we do have, which I totally will put out there that it's not super long term, we base it on following the kids forward, knowing that in childhood that our sense of gender can kind of be very fluid. What we do know when we hit adolescence, it's incredibly rare for reversion to happen after. And it's also kind of helping the families to be supportive in that, yeah, if that rare circumstance happens and there is a reversion, that we're still going to be okay with that as well. If you decided to go on medication, there can be some irreversible changes that happen.
Right. So none of that really applies to my daughter's circumstances because it's a case of adolescent concept. What you just described was a case of childhood.
Yeah, that's one case.
Before that was consistent throughout adolescence, but that was never the case in childhood or in early puberty. And so I think we're kind of comparing apples and oranges there.
Kind of, but also it's along the same spectrum, right? Everybody's going to be different in the spectrum. Some people it's at puberty, some people don't decide.
Well, what are the rates of reversion for adolescent onset dysphoria?
They're very rare. They're so rare you can't even count them.
Oh, really? Because I read like 90%.
Yes, I can't agree with that for sure. And
well, what's the data on that? Can I see a study or something like that?
Sure. Yeah, I can get some papers.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to read that.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did you read 90%?
A couple of different studies.
Okay, I'd like to see those studies.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. If you have an email or something, I can send you.
Bring it here.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
We can do a little transfer. Lots of studies. I'm totally down to do that. We can also get the data from this clinic if you want. We do know that there are studies that show rates of suicide, rates of depression, rates of anxiety when we don't support them and we don't kind of help them along the transition is incredibly high.
What about post-transition?
Rates are very good. Those studies, I can get those studies for you.
Sure. I've been reading different.
Again,
most of what I've been seeing is that there is no difference in the suicide rate post-op, or that it is actually higher.
So what is your biggest concern?
Johns Hopkins actually stopped doing the transition surgery.
They stopped doing transition surgery?
They did, yeah. I think they put it back on since then, but they stopped it for quite a while.
So what are your concerns?
My concerns is that no due diligence has been performed in the sense of confirming what the condition actually is. The idea that this might be a phase and never on the table to begin with. From the time that I found out that she had actually been referred here without my knowledge, everything has been in pursuit of an actual transition without ever actually considering any more conservative options. It was always the case that I was supposed to support the transition. But I need to have some kind of an assurance that this is going to mitigate harm instead of inducing future harm before I can report about it. And I haven't seen anything in the way of any due diligence or any consideration of any more conservative options.
So what would be your suggestion for a confirmation?
To say things like, some people are born with XXY chromosomes and are born with XXY chromosomes. And I would ask, well, okay, has my child been tested for Klinefelters? And he would say no. And he would say that, some people are born with a brain that is more anatomically male or it is female. And I said, well, has an MRI been done to confirm that my child's anatomy, the brain anatomy, is more congruent with that of a male than it is with a female? He would say no. I would say, well, are you going to refer for an MRI? He would say no. So it seems to me that everything that's sort of driving this is really more ideological and activist-based than there is any science to support it.
So there's literally if we're going based on science, right? There's no science that backs up that if we do an MRI that it's going to change anything with respect to somebody who's transgender.
Right.
There's no science to back that up. So if we order an MRI and absolutely everybody who feels a transgender, that's kind of unacceptable.
But it's not an MRI, then what is it?
I can't comment on what Dr. said, but we know that there's been no studies that tell us if you get an MRI, that's going to tell you that you're transgender.
How do you know it exists?
But talking to our patients and being supportive of them.
But people make all kinds of claims like this, especially like mentally ill people. There are entire societies out there that are dedicated to the support of alien abductees. But that doesn't mean that we accept that alien abduction is an actual thing. That's a natural phenomenon.
The main thing I think that we have to think about is nothing that we do or say is going to change how we feel.
How do you know that?
There's nothing that because I know that. He's going to feel how he feels. He's going to feel how he feels.
Right. So when people feel a certain way or think a certain way that doesn't conform with reality as we understand through science, to what can be confirmed, whenever that perception discords with that reality, in every other case, what we do is we offer them therapy, maybe some medication, something like that. But we don't accept the delusions, where somebody's perception of reality discords with what we understand about reality. We would call that a delusion. But in this case, we don't offer the counseling and the medication. We actually change the reality to conform with the perception. So why is this the exception?
So I'm just going to go back to and I think moving towards testosterone, and that's going to be his decision, right? Completely his decision when he wants to do it. If he did revert, your worry is that if he reverts back, what is the effect on his mental health at that point, right? So, but what would be the effect? Like, you're going to be there to support him if that happens. The main thing is that we want to support him and be there for him and be accepting of him.
Well, my main thing is that I want to prevent harm from coming to my child.
So what about the harm by not doing anything, right? Well,
I don't know that is
right now.
In every other medical circumstance, it's not the case that the medical intervention is necessarily considered to be the less harmful approach, as there's a risk-benefit analysis there that just doesn't support that course of action. You're pursuing a course of action that has an inherent risk associated with it.
There's also a risk of not doing anything.
Okay, well, how did you determine it? Well, I mean, I haven't seen that, but I'd be happy to look at whatever studies you might have. Everything that I've seen seems to be indicating that the suicide rate does not go down. I understand the seriousness of the situation. Don't get me wrong, my heart goes out to anybody who's suffering, but that doesn't mean that I'm just going to suspend disbelief in favor of an unscientific approach. I don't see any science behind any of this. And I keep asking for it, but I don't get it.
I don't think, the thing is, I don't think we're going to be able to make you satisfied.
Well, you're wrong about that, because I'm willing to change my mind. It's just that I need to see evidence.
I hear you, but we're not going to be able to give you the evidence that you want.
Because you don't have any. Is there any other medical intervention that you would pursue without evidence?
Yes.
Like what?
Okay, I think that I'm not going to keep going.
I'm just asking for an example.
No, I hear you.
I mean, give me the evidence. I'll change my mind.
Okay, so you're getting slightly aggressive here.
Yeah, that's because you're putting my child in danger with this recklessness.
Okay. You can go around in circles and keep going around in circles.
I'm not going in circles.
We're just trying to help.
I'm not going in circles. All I asked for was some kind of evidence.
We're not going to be able to give you that evidence.
Okay, so geez, you just stepped away.
I'm back.
Yeah.
That was really good. I was a bit muffled, but that was good. And you know, the British Medical Journal recently found that there's no evidence that medical gender reassignment does anything to resolve the psychiatric morbidity. So their psychological makeup and their mental health condition does not get better with gender reassignment. It doesn't. And that's why the suicide rates are up so much more with up years after. And you showed the trajectory. One thing I wrote, neither hormones nor surgeries have been shown to reduce suicidality in the long term for these children. So everything, you know, that's being told by these doctors to parents is absolute falsehood. It's lies. And it's based on, now, you know, one would hope that they are not, this sounds well versed in good research, that they're assuming instead of actually, well, they aren't versed in good research. What do I want to say here? I'm trying to give the doctors the benefit of the doubt, but there is no benefit of the doubt for these doctors that are promoting this. And the reality is the parents need to take back the medical decisions for their children. And those decisions have been robbed from parents with gender affirming care. Like, that's the bottom line. Parents have not been able to advocate for their children because they're bombarded with this kind of rhetoric like this doctor was doing. It's like, oh, that's just incredible. So yeah,
aggressive, right?
here's my 2 cents. Hey, by the way, I have a children's book I wrote called Whatever Happened to Emily. I don't know if you've seen this one or not, but it is really, I think it's very good. I've had some teachers read it, and they said it's just like what has happened to some of the kids in my class. Reading this book was like listening to them talk about transitioning. And so I think it's helpful for parents, and it has a positive outcome because it's based on true stories. And so not one story, but several. I didn't want to identify anybody there, but yeah, that this is really important. Children would naturally desist, and parents can help that if they do some steps. Number one, here's my recommendation for parents in these situations and grandparents, remove your children immediately from the public school system. Take them out of school same day, if at all possible, because your child's life actually depends on your actions, immediate actions. So whatever you need to do, keep them out of school for a while. Quite honestly, what they're learning in school is not helping their education anyways, overall. And they could lose a couple months with probably no long-term repercussions educationally. It's quite, as far as I'm concerned, and I think most people would agree. Encourage your child to discontinue any friendships with others who cross-sex identify. And I don't call it transgender in my book. I explain that they're cross-sex identifying because I want to put the language back where it should be. And transgender is simply, it's not a medical term, it's a political term. Spend copious amounts of time with your child. Start spending lots of time. Now that's hard if you've got a preteen, a young teen that just doesn't want to be with you. You know how teens are, especially in our culture today. But you do whatever you need to do to spend time with them. Find out what they like, do stuff they like to do. But particularly if you can get them out hiking, get them out doing physical things that will help and really begin to have some positive communication going on with your child. Increase bonding time with dad. Here we go, dads. For both boys and girls, they desperately need mom and dad. And so those are kind of some of the things. And encourage your child's, if they're a boy, encourage their masculinity. If they're a girl, encourage their femininity. That doesn't mean you have to dress them up in pearls and tiaras. It just means that, encourage them to just enjoy some of the things that other girls might enjoy. I was a tomboy. Listen, growing up, I was a tomboy. I would have been targeted. I was vulnerable as a child for some stuff going on in my home. I would have been so targeted in this culture. And forget dresses and pink and all that kind of stuff. But I still knew I was a girl. And these children just need to be encouraged. And the same with boys. Get them out. And that doesn't mean, my dad taught me how to shoot, different things. That's not masculine or feminine. That's just behavior, things that are enjoyable. Why can't we just enjoy life together, parents and children? So that's kind of my recommendation for parents, really encourage those things.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about like re-embracing reality. I mean, you don't really have to force anything on them. You don't have to force your daughter to wear dresses. She can wear pants and be a tomboy and things like that. But you're dealt a certain genetic hand in life, and the whole game of life is essentially to play a good hand. Like everybody has their own limitations, but play a good hand, right? That's the whole goal. So
just be the best you can be and encourage your child. What are they good at? What did they, that has nothing to do with masculine or feminine, just what do they love to do? What are they good at? And encourage them to do those things and get their focus off of sexuality and all of those kind of things, because that's destroying their minds. Yeah, it's just really good to get them right away from all of the social effect, the school effect, and have that time. And what you might find is that if you do put them back into the school system, if you have to do that, that their mind will already be recalibrated because they'll have thought through some things. And that's what happened in my story about Emily, that she began to think through what was going on and recognize that she really wasn't a boy, and she was, finally happy to be a girl, but could be the girl she wanted to be. That's the reality. So listen, I was a late bloomer when it come to femininity. It was kind of something I didn't do well early on, and so what? That's just
Well,
how it was.
I got my ear pierced when I was 9. I grew my hair long and I did gymnastics until I was about 12 or something. And then when I was 13, I did boxing. So
Yeah, there you go. But you know what? We need to encourage kids just to enjoy life and be kids and forget all this, all this external stuff. So
yeah, they're
parents
kids.
can do some things, and most important is, spend that lots and lots of time with your children.
Dale is here saying, hello, troopers. Hey, Dale, thanks for being with us, but you're late. Drop and give me 20. We run a pretty tight show around here.
Listen,
one other thing that you kind of...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that one other thing that you touched on was the definition here. So I just pulled up the DSM-5 criteria for gender dysphoria, and this was where the shift was. So in DSM-5, it's gender dysphoria, but in DSM-4, it's gender identity disorder.
Exactly.
And the thing is, I'll show you like the key difference here that I want to zero in on. So here's the DSM-5. This is the definition. Like, they list all the criteria. I won't go through them all, but the top part here says,
can you maximize a bit for people?
Oh yeah,
it's pretty
sure.
small for us old people, but yes, that's
No
good
problem.
There you go.
It says a marked incongruence between one's experienced/expressed gender and natal gender of at least 6 months in duration, as manifested by at least 2 of the following. And it basically says that you don't feel comfortable in your body in all of these. So, but then if we go to the definition for gender identity disorder, which this is the same condition, but it changed names to gender dysphoria from the DSM-4 to DSM-5. When we look at gender identity disorder from the DSM-4, it says a strong, persistent cross-gender identification, not merely a desire for any perceived cultural advantages of being the other sex. In children, the disturbance is manifested by 4 or more of the following criteria. So, the thing that really I kind of zero in on here is with the DSM-5, it's talking about this incongruence of at least 6 months. Like, puberty is probably 6 years for a lot of people.
Well, listen, and here we have in the first line already, watch the language manipulation, expressed gender and natal gender, natal sex. We really need to go back to that, because they do talk about sex characteristics further on, but they're not identifying it as natal sex, as natal gender. And of course, all children now have to be assigned gender at birth. You're not assigned, you are being a female. Like, the doctors had it wrong for 5,000 years. Mums and dads did too. We're all of a sudden we're all brighter than we ever used to be. Not, anyways. So yeah, those kind of things, and it didn't just creep in upon us. It really was strategic, and you can see there why it changed from gender identity disorder, and why they even kept it. Why they even kept it in the DSM is so that, not so it could be diagnosed so much, but so that they could treat it medically. That was the big deal. They could treat it with medicine, not those. And so that's really why it's still there, because it soon went from gender dysphoria to I'm transgender. That was the language. So yeah, we've kind come a long way,
And
baby, and it's harmed
I,
children all the way through.
I think it makes it is that nebulous language that makes it so hard to really pin down. Like if we're talking about one of these parents who is skeptical of some of these claims, pushing back on some of these aggressive clinicians, like we heard in the clip that I showed. The thing is that it would if you call it a disorder at this point, people will just look at you like you're a bigot, like you're calling them names or something like that, that this is coming from a place of hatred, because now it's dysphoria, right? Like we call it gender dysphoria. And even like the amorphous Rosemary Barton will be on there with Blaine Higgs and talking about gender dysphoria like it's just another sexuality. Like it's a dysfunction. It's a psychiatric disorder. It's the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Psychiatric Disorders.
Right. It's a disorder of the mind.
Yes. And so by softening the language from identity disorder to dysphoria, it has that effect of really masking the fact that this is a disorder. After all, it's still a disorder, and now it's become just politically incorrect to even call it that. So, do you think that? I think you do. I think you did say this, but do you think that that has been something like a driving factor in the explosion of these transition surgeries?
I think the fact, you see, yes, when we're talking about it being just a dysphoria, it's hard for me to get my mind around what you just said, because when really you think about the surgeries, you would really expect that they should be able to diagnose something, right? As a disorder. This is a disorder that needs to be surgically corrected. And how do you surgically correct dysphoria? You know, the whole
psychiatric disorder
thing. Well, and dysphoria is just basically unease. Anybody can be dysphoric for parts of the day. You know, if you want to talk about just not gender dysphoria, just dysphoric. You're uneasy with something, you know? So it's pretty complicated how they figured it all out, that dysphoria, the best way to treat it, and gender dysphoria, gender unease, is by medicalizing these children and then cutting off body parts. It just is so incomprehensible. Oh yeah, so I talk about body integrity dysphoria, or body identity, it's BIID, body integrity identity disorder, is actually a classic diagnosis that's very similar, you know. So when we have this issue, we have individuals who have been diagnosed, and maybe they skipped the diagnosis and didn't go for help, but actually they want to be have legs or body parts amputated because it will make them feel better. They don't feel right about their arm being there. They want it amputated. And people have put their arms on train tracks, like, because doctors don't want to do this. I mean, a few doctors have done this a few years ago when it first came to light, and yeah, they didn't. It didn't stack up well in the medical societies, because who amputates body parts just because someone's delusional that they think they need to have an amputation? But what are we talking about? The same kind of dysphoria with gender? It's pretty similar.
Pretty similar, although there's no social contagion for the amputation of fingers. I think that is probably stemming from the same sort of social contagion, but this hasn't become a trend just yet.
It is becoming a trend. I hate to tell you this. It is becoming a trend. There are websites now, and here we go with social media, because, and I talk about this in my book, about how many of these individuals who have a body integrity identity disorder, they they have developed websites so they can group together and, decide how they can best, get the attention they want and why they do what they do. And part of it is because it gives them attention. Other people, actually, some of them get sexual gratification from amputation. Like this is how crazy your mind can become if you allow it to embrace unreality. And so we have to look at the whole picture here, and it's pretty scary. You wouldn't, if your child came and said, well, my leg, I don't want my leg anymore because it doesn't feel right. I don't think it's really part of my body and I want to get rid of it. What parent would do that? Of course you wouldn't. But with gender ideology, well, this is what we've done. So, and of course, there'll be some people that say, well, those are two very different categories. But they're both disorders in my mind. And I think that you can compare. And yes, it isn't quite the same level, absolutely, of social contagion, because it's usually adults. These aren't children as a rule. These are adults who are fixated on amputating part of their body or blinding themselves. Some have blinded themselves. It's horrible. You like pouring bleach in their eyes. You can't begin to understand how a person really can become that consumed with an idea. But the mind, begins to pursue something at an irrational state, and it's, they keep doing it, and if they keep finding people that will applaud them, they will keep doing it. That's scary.
Yeah. At least we haven't gotten to the place where, bipedalism is fluid. The way the gender is, that is to say.
No, and doctors and medical societies are not engaged in amputation. They will, the doctor would have he'd come up before a review board.
Well, let's hope so. And for anybody who's just listening without the visual, I was just showing the National Post article that's titled "Quebec Man Has 2 Healthy Fingers Amputated to Relieve Body Integrity Dysphoria." I mean, this is kind of the logical next step in all of this. Like, once you accept the ideology, once you start from that basic premise, this is actually a logical progression. The problem is with the initial premise. It never met the evidentiary threshold required to be considered verified. So that's what we need to address here. Is that initial premise, really? I guess this might be a good time for a final thought there. Dr. Gillies, I do appreciate you being so generous with your time, and I'm not in a rush, really. I just I try to keep things around the 2 hour.
I may have to go home. Not go home. I may have to cook supper for my family, so they might be in a rush.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. So, yeah, how do we do that? I guess how do we push back? How do we check this initial premise, right? This premise of gender fluidity and transgenderism, essentially.
Well, I think as more people become aware of how insidious it is and how the medical establishment has colluded with Big Pharma, because let's face it, Big Pharma has tremendous tentacles into this whole area of transgender ideology, and the money that is made, the gender clinics that have popped up all over the US particularly. I mean, I think there's close to 300 now. I think there were like 2 in 2010. I may be a little off on my figures, but it's something like that. And why is that? Well, because it's big money, Big Pharma. And the doctors, I mean, it's $40,000 in the US for double mastectomy. The doctors get paid. That's why it's so insidious, and that these doctors are making lots of money at these gender clinics, and they are, and Lupron is a cancer drug, by the way. It's It is not irreversible and has some pretty awful effects. Lupron has been sued several times. The company has been sued. That was prior. They've been sued prior to the whole gender affirming stuff because of some of the my brain just went bad repercussions. But yeah, I think what we look at with this too, so Lupron, and there's another thing, another drug that is put under the skin to suppress puberty. And those are really, I mean, they are meant to keep the child from going through any pain of puberty. And that's often the reason with young women, by the way, which I'm all over the place here again. But young women, we are living in a very pain-averse society. We have somehow decided that our children should not experience pain in any way, shape, or form. And when I was talking before about protecting children, I'm not suggesting that you don't let them experience life. So we have young girls that get to, they hear about what it's going to be like, going through puberty and having their period and those kind of things and the pain that goes along with that. And they are terrified. They're terrified. And so they would rather stop puberty. Like, this is how short-sighted all of this is. And these are just children, so what do they know, right? And instead of teaching them that this is just a part of life, it's a normal part of life, it's okay, you're going to be okay, instead of encouraging them, no, we just want to help them transition. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of teaching that has to go on. So you were going to say something about Lupron, and I interrupted you here.
Oh, that's fine. You can interrupt me as much as you want. I brought you on here to talk. I talk every night. So, but I'm just showing for those of you who might be just listening, this is the stock value for Lupron, which is the cancer treatment drug that Dr. Gillies just mentioned there, that is being prescribed off-label as a puberty blocker because it induces menopause. Here is the share price over 5 years. It's up 109.75%. So, yeah, do you think perhaps that incentivizes some of this as well? Well,
Yep,
I mean,
big pharma, and then of course all of the so you have all of the drugs. Oh, and by the way, in case people don't understand this, is that these children, you go on hormone, first of all, the puberty blockers. And once that's finished, if you go right directly on to hormone therapy, it's not irreversible. They can't go back. You can't go back and recover puberty all of a sudden. It's gone. It's gone. Yeah. And the other thing that we don't hear much about is what happens in puberty is the brain, it's like, how the 2-year-old brain starts just going and the 2 to 3-year-old child just matures psychologically, and their brain matures. They can talk now, they can do all kinds of things because their brain is really growing, and it's really, now I'm not talking expanding like this, but you know what I mean. They're all of the neural pathways are getting entrenched, and they're learning new things, and they just can do that so well. Well, it happens again at puberty.
Yes.
And so what happens when these children go on puberty blockers? The normal recalibration of the brain. So from the black and white thinking to being able to think outside the box doesn't happen. So you have these children who have not only marginalized themselves medically, but they have, then had body parts removed, but psychologically, cognitively, they're impacted, but cognitively, they are not able to really have that kind of broad thinking that comes after puberty because they never went through it. So there's some studies coming out on the cognition and what happened, but it has been compromised. It's being compromised by puberty blockers. So how horrendous is this really?
Sickest thing to ever happen in Canada. I'll say it again.
Yeah.
That is an excellent point as well. Like the brain is an organ, it's part of the body. And what happens during puberty? Well, your body goes through incredible changes, right? And it's interesting that you point out that that happens. Well, it does happen in early childhood as well. And I'm reminded that Freud said that we probably evolved from an animal that reached sexual maturation at the age of 5, because we seem to go through like 2 puberties. One is right before the age of 5, and then the other one is in adolescence. Well, we consider adolescence, but like the testes drop during that period between between 2 and 5, somewhere around there. So it seems to be the case that, we actually have like 2 puberties basically. And the amount of changes that we're going through in adolescence is probably on the level of that which we're going through, in what we call it, babyhood or toddlerhood. So,
but don't get confused here. And you have to be careful, because people will use this Freudian concept because of two puberties. 5-year-olds do not come into sexual maturation. No. I mean, there is no, but this is what the whole pedophilia movement and what Kinsey in 1948 was trying to promote. And so we have to be careful, because we want to eradicate that thought from our society. And because Kinsey said that we're sexual beings from birth. And that gets very confusing. And that's what they're teaching in the schools, that children are sexual beings. You know what? We have sex that is determined at birth. We have male and female. We are not sexual until puberty.
Yeah.
And let's keep it that way. And even then, of course, as every parent knows, they don't want their 12-year-old going out and having sex. But there are people, and they're teaching it in the universities now, that pedophilia is an orientation, and it is okay. It is okay. And it's been promoted for years anyways. But it's a very scary place.
Yeah, it's being mainstream now. I mean, for
being
anybody with eyes to see. Yeah. It's being embraced, for that matter.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One thing the CAST report also did, which I think is good, they're going to keep follow-up services for the 17 to 25-year-olds so that they can keep data and they can keep doing research. They also are going to have every case actually be discussed at a multidisciplinary team like meetings. This is really good. And that there's going to be a national provider collaborative. So they're going to have outside people, not just the gender specialists, but outside psychologists and doctors that come together to actually meet on behalf of the child. And the parents are going to be involved. And they're going to standardize psychological and pharmacological care, so that they're not going to children are not going to be able to order online these puberty blockers and stuff, because it's also a big money maker. They can order these things and have them delivered online. It's just, and the other thing that the NHS, so the National Health Service of England, who actually requisitioned the CAST report, and all of it comes together. They are going to ensure that there's provision made for people who are considering detransitioning. So they're going to help those individuals, because right now, and you heard it, like children have every kind of support, and adolescents, every kind of support if they want to transition. They find they have no support if they decide to detransition. And this is what happened. I mean, I've talked to adolescents, and they were going through the whole process. They'd been encouraged to be part of groups in schools. And when they got into the group, they were encouraged to transition. And then they ended up becoming suicidal after they'd been indoctrinated more. But the overall result was they didn't go on to any medical drugs or anything like that, and got out of the school, spent time with parents. And what happened is then they start, thinking, well, I'm really not the opposite sex. They go back to school, and the very people who have been encouraging them to become trans are now like their biggest enemy. They won't speak to them. The teachers won't speak to them. They are ostracized. Can you imagine how that makes that child feel? So, they're told, oh, we'll be here. We'll support you no matter what your choices are. We're just going to be there for you. And then, they choose not to transition over a few months, they go back. And most children actually do not transition, even if they start kind of thinking that. And then they're just ostracized. And so this is really sad. But this new report, the CAST report, is saying, hey, if they're thinking about detransitioning, we're going to be there to support them and help them. So the next miracle would be if the CAST report actually made it to Canada. And well, it has made it to Canada. Actually, I talked to Premier Smith last week. She had already read the CAST report. I'm so impressed with her. She had already read it. Now she's not perfect, and she is on board with understanding what's going on. And so she's reading the good research and what's come out of this 4-year study and the review. And that's why we're having some changes. We're seeing some changes in Alberta. Now we want to see it come to fruition and see the legislation be adopted, but it needs to come right across Canada. So, and fighting for that to happen means that we will probably need a change in Prime Minister very quickly.
Oh, yes. And that is where it all started, with the trans people are people too speech from Justin Trudeau in 2015. This was like the first thing on his agenda. Could you let Daniel Smith know that 16 is still too young to go on the puberty?
Oh, I agree, but it's better than it was. And I guess where we have it, we just have to take it step by step. But 18, yes. 18 like England does, yes. And provide the helps for parents and get doctors on board with reality. I mean, all of that's it's going to take a real push, and she's getting a tremendous amount of push back against it, of course, because of big pharma and the medical and psychological associations who have all sold their souls to this, right?
And that's how she should know that she's over the target, when she's taking all that shrapnel, right?
You're on track if you're getting lots of pushback, right?
That's right. And you mentioned, I know I'm really pushing my luck here with your time, but since you mentioned the follow-up that they're finally going to start including for some of these people, especially the detransitioners, this is Trans Youth Can, and this is a joint project that's going down in Ontario, I believe, between multiple clinics, including CHEO, for example. Trans Youth Can is a study of youth referred for blockers or hormones at 10 clinics in Canada. We are looking at medical, social, and family outcomes over a 2-year period, a 2-year period, in order to have a better information for doctors and nurses, counselors, schools.
Yeah.
And
I wonder who this is funded by.
You know what? I didn't even look at that. But what I did want to point out really quickly here is there's this paragraph here about the project. It says, youth whose gender identity does not match the gender they were assigned at birth have been increasingly referred to pediatric clinics that provide medical care to delay puberty and alter physical sex characteristics to align with inner gender identity. However, while these treatments are generally considered safe, there is very little research on the short and long-term social and medical experiences and outcomes of youth undergoing clinical care. I think that's enough to make my point here. They are literally experimenting on kids.
Yeah, 2 years is such a short time, right? I mean, they can be on puberty blockers for 3 to 4 years and then, of course, go on hormones. But Yeah, they need long-term research going into this, and the best comes out of Sweden and their 30-year study, and it wasn't very encouraging. It's pretty discouraging. So best we could do is stop all gender affirming care and let kids go back to being kids.
Yeah, 1000%. And I think that is probably a pretty decent note to end things on. Let kids be kids. Let parents be parents.
Yes.
I happen to think that the parental rights argument is not the right tack to take. I think it's about child safety at the end of the day, because what about a parent's right to transition their child? And there are
Well,
plenty
you've
of
got
those.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
parents can, although, yeah, most parents would do what is the best for the child. And yeah.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. There seem to be far too many of them out there who would rather use their child like some kind of a status symbol to signal their virtue to their woke friends. I mean, that
And
is a
that
thing
has
that's going on.
happened. Yeah.
Well, it's trendy, right? It's a trend. Anyway, it's a real crying shame. But at the end of the day, I think we got to get back to basics, like you were saying. And one of the most basic tenets of our society has always been that children need protection. The vulnerable should be protected, and the most vulnerable among us are the children, so they need the most protection.
Yep.
And all of that seems to have been cast by the wayside, right down to the knowledge that early sexualization of children is harmful. So it's really incredible.
Yes.
But I'm just going to plug the V4F website, everybody, before we sign off here. Subscribe to our newsletter here. Join if you're a veteran by clicking join here. Support here, and you can donate to us directly to help with our operational costs, like my StreamYard account and the website, or you can donate to the support fund to help Canadians who are suffering under this tyranny. Contestants for the fund this month, and everybody who donates gets a chance to vote on where that goes. Chris Lysak, one of the Coots 4 that needs no introduction. Lisa Robinson is back again. Heartless city councillor who was sanctioned 90 days wages, even though she's a single mother and all she was doing was standing up for her constituents. The Accountability Project is the legal fund that Drew in particular was so instrumental in setting up, and this is for the purpose of providing people with a fund who need assistance in civil litigation, like class actions. Let's hope there's a really big one for all of the children who were swept up in all of this. And you have the opportunity to send 10% of your donation to Adopt a Veteran this month. You can sign up by clicking one of the buttons for your credit card subscription here, or send your donation via e-transfer to fund@veteransforfreedom.ca. That's fund@veterans4freedom.ca with the auto deposit enabled. But if you can't do that, please use the password fund4freedom. That's all caps fund 4, all caps freedom, and we'll make sure that gets off to a worthy cause. That brings us all the way back to Marcus Aurelius, and he says, if someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed. Harmed is the person who continues in his self-deception and ignorance. Oh my, and we have the Online Harms Act in queue right now. And by the way, there's no such thing as online harm. That's just butthurt. So that I think is that's how far we've fallen. You can go all the way back to Marcus Aurelius, and he knows that the truth never really harmed anyone. And we can go all the way back to like 450 BC, and people understood natural immunity, for example, like with the Antonine Plague and stuff. People understood that. We knew that right up until 2020, and then all of a sudden we forgot, and now we know it again. So
we lost our minds.
Yeah, and I see the profit incentive, big pharma, in all of this as well. So it's a real shame. But if you want to give us one more final thought there, Dr. Gillies, before you go cook supper.
Well, I'm not sure.
I'll give you the space, but I'd like to.
Yeah, I just think I thank you for this opportunity to talk about this and to really bring to light some of the stuff that's been going on for many, many years, and that this is a strategy. I believe there is a strategy of annihilation that is in play, and it is all about the annihilation of humanity. So that's my last 2 cents, and that we need to fight back with everything we have and protect our children from the tyranny that's happening to them out there.
I agree with one caveat. I think it's Westerners in particular who are under attack.
Absolutely. Well, that's right.
Right down to the Christianity, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, that's it for us tonight there, folks. I'm just going to throw a few comments in here before I sign off. Lorianne is saying, thank you both. Great show and giving us the heart. And F You Make Me is saying, excellent merch, super fast delivery. Yeah, I just ordered some more merch from the Veterans for Freedom website too. You can do that to support us as well, please, by all means. And Patricia is saying, good night, God bless, sweet dreams. I love you all. Have a good sleep and all that jazz. Don't mind if I do, Patricia, but the truth is I don't really sleep. So, and Serena is saying, thank you, Jeff and Dr. Gillies. Good weekend all. And we got lots of hearts coming from Patricia. And Frank says, thank you, Jeff. Great show. I appreciate you guys being with me. And Dwayne over on Rumble is saying, another evening with knowledge. Have a good one, folks. Thank you, Jeff. My pleasure. And Summer is saying that you, Dr. Gillies, needs to share this information with all of the premiers. No kidding. And just to put a bug in your ear, In It for Love, I'm sorry I didn't get to your question. But I saw the question there before. We kind of went off on another. Circumcision made all this normal. I think I could probably make that argument, but I would have to get into the fourth turning and all that stuff like I usually do. And Abraham's sacrifice was a fourth turning, the likes of which we're living through right now. So I'll just leave you with that teaser, and maybe we'll dive into that some other time. But Dr. Gillies, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate your courage in speaking out in all of this, and your knowledge. Thanks for taking the time to come in here and educate us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's really good. And I am really glad to be here because you have a tremendous handle on all of this. Great to be here. Take care, everyone.
I do my best. Yeah. And until next time, folks, have a good weekend. Stay frosty and stay safe out there.
Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs.